A Day in the Fox Miniatures Lockup Vault at 20th Century Fox, circa 1974. 20 years ago, I had one of many conversations with Phil Broad of the Model Builders Reference Vault website, regarding Irwin Allen, lost in space and the filming miniatures used during production. Phil told me that on one occasion he was able to tour the filming miniatures storage vault at Fox, back in 1974. Phil had been generous and wrote me up a description of that day, which I had forgotten about, until I discovered recently while purging some old external storage drives. Phil explains he wasn't able to take any photos that day. Therefore, images in this video are examples of a similar time period, with priority selection given to Cloudsters. Mr. Phil Broad.
Hi Mike, it was about 1974 sometime when I first visited 20th Century Fox Studios. It was during that first visit that a friend and I were allowed to look around in the Fox miniature lockup. This was a smallish room enclosed in chain-link fence on a second-floor mezzanine in the massive wood mill on the Olympic side of the studio. I only wish that I had photos of it. My friend took some pictures but I never even saw them, much less got copies of them. Oh well. It was in that lockup that we saw 3 or possibly 4 examples of the standard size 4-foot Jupiter 2. Honestly, I didn't count them, but what surprised me was how many there were. They all had the window cutouts seen in City Beneath the Sea and had been painted the copper color seen in that film. The space was tight in the lockup, only room enough really for a single path through the stacks of models and model parts. Typical of all cluttered storage rooms, it was dark too. These conditions did not allow us to examine the models, not to mention the fact that the gentleman showing us around was not going to spend all day in there. He expected us to take a quick look then get the H out, if you know what I mean. It did make a big impression on me, however, that is why I remember so much about it, but unfortunately specific details could not be gathered in such a short visit. Remember too that we were faced with a room that was full of models. They filled the many shelving units, were stacked on the floor and hung from the ceiling. I will describe what I remember about it for you, of course. If you aren't interested, read no further, haha joking. The room was long and narrow, barely wide enough for a row of shelves along each side with an aisleway in between. It was located on the front of the building, so there was a row of windows along that side, but in spite of this, it seemed dark. It was afternoon and this was on the north side of the building, so there was only indirect light coming in through dirty windows. The first row of shelves on the right as we entered was full of cardboard cups that contained the thousands of small metal detail parts which had been removed from the Tora fleet visible outside, below the windows. These were mostly guns, deck winches, bollards, etc. Next on the right, that I remember, was a shelf that had the 8-foot Seaview straddling 2 shelf units, at about knee level, so we didn't get a good look at it, the skipjack sub used in Voyage to the Bottoms of the Sea, and on top, just out of reach, was the bow of what was probably about an 18 to 24-inch Proteus from Fantastic Voyage. On the left was a row of shelves that came to the height of the bottom sill of the windows. It was on these shelves that 2 models of the Chariot were sitting, the one that Greg Jean now has and another one. One had the tracks installed, the other only had the wheels. They probably only had one set of tracks and switched them back and forth as needed. There was also a Spindrift from Land of the Giants on the top of this shelf as well. At the far end of these shelves the room opened to the right into a wider area that was now roughly square in shape. This back area had several Jupiter 2s leaning up on edge against one set of shelves to the right, and I believe there was another on a pile stuff in the middle of the room and possibly a 4th up high, either on top of some shelves or hanging from the ceiling. I am not certain of the number seen there, but there were at least 2 leaning up against the shelves. The pile in the middle also included 2 large examples of the flying boxcar used in Flight of the Phoenix and a second Spindrift. The second version of Spindrift was not finished, and it was my impression that it might have been the original pattern that the molds were made from. It was at least partially painted, so that explanation may be incorrect. Behind the Jupiter 2s on the floor was a large display case which contained a 4-foot-high Lost in Space pod. The walls at the back near the roof were lined with World War II aircraft, in particular I remember several examples of Stuka hanging there which might well have been built for films actually made during the war. Outside this lockup, the mezzanine ran around two sides of the mill. Underneath on the ground floor were smaller workshops and offices, but the second floor seemed to be devoted to storage. It was here that the larger items were kept in crates. The man showing us around showed us the crates that contained the Lost in Space robot, but naturally he wouldn't open them, drat. I'm sure that same area was full of the many large models of Seaview, Jupiter 2 and who knows what else, all in crates. It was really dark in these areas, so we would not have seen much without flashlights anyway. And absolutely everything was covered in thick dark dust, including the exposed models in the lockup. This also contributed to our inability to really study them. No, they did not really take care of the models in any way. They were just stacked in and around the shelves in that room. I did visit the studio several times after that, but never got back into that storage area again. I wish that I had gotten photos, but it just wasn't meant to be. I only have my mental photos, such as they are. I hope my written description helps you to imagine what we saw, if not see it for yourself. Phil Broad. June 1, 2004.